All right, so we're talking about civil liberties on this channel pretty often, and one of the sayings that's most commonly used when discussing civil liberties, especially freedom of speech, for the First Amendment, if you're here in the U.S., is attributed to Voltaire. I've heard that it's actually not him who said it, and it's difficult to know who was the first person to use this expression, but it goes, "I disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." So I'll put a little spin on this. I think that you should be free to say whatever you want, but uh, you shouldn't be exempt from defending your stupidity. And the person that I think is he's the best example of this is Marc Lamont Hill. Marc Lamont Hill is an academic over at Temple, and he used to be a commentator at CNN. Last year, over some sort of tiff that happened because of his, he has this activism thing that he's doing with Palestinians. So he said that he wants Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. And apparently at a certain point after that, CNN severed their relationship with him after an outcry from a number of Jewish and pro-Israel groups. So before we keep going, I want you guys to like the video and subscribe. Also, please consider joining Minds.com. I've started this group that I call the Leopard Civil Liberties Forum. It is probably one of the few places left that I can really promote my stuff, because it's impossible to do it on Reddit anymore. You just keep getting banned from anywhere if you put anything that's self-produced. So this is one of my new articles on the personal blog, the Bold Like a Leopard blog, and it concerns this issue that happened this weekend, this argument, or I think it was actually last week, between Chen Mazig, who is an Iraqi Jew and a former IDF serviceman. He also happens to be gay, and his family is from Iraq, and Marc Lamont Hill. And Hill actually put out this statement where he said something like this. Okay, he said, "The racial and political project that transformed Palestinian Jews who lived peacefully with other Palestinians into the 20th century identity category of Mizrahi as a means of detaching them from Palestinian identity." So he was condemning this notion of there being a Mizrahi identity as distinct from a Palestinian Jew. There is no real Palestinian Jew identity. What people call Palestinian Jews are simply Jewish residents of historical Israel, or the geographical area of Palestine before the 20th century. So there used to be communities in that area, probably as long as there's been any sort of organized civilization there. Since, of course, the fall of the Jewish kingdom in the, I think it was the 2nd century after the death of Christ. So you would see in succeeding generations, they would simply be administered by different empires. For example, the Byzantine Empire, the Turks, there were, I think the Mamelukes were in control for a while, and there was always some sort of remnant of the Jewish community there. They simply didn't have a very significant number, or they didn't have any real political control over anything. So I went through this breakdown. What really is ridiculous about his statement is that Marc Lamont Hill, when you see black people trying to object to left-wing narratives, he is one of the first people to call them sellouts and Uncle Toms and things like that. When it comes to people, for example, there was a clip, and I wrote a whole article about it in the Hard News. This article I don't think was a good thing to feature on there, because it's not really what they talk about. But he actually told a guy who was trying to organize this campaign to get black kids to pull their pants up. He claimed that he was dissing black culture. And I think that the the obvious question would be, where in historical black culture is it really a thing to sag your pants? It just isn't. And in fact, I would wager that it's only been that way since probably the 80s or the 70s. If you look at men's fashion of any of the racial groups, but I mean, I think you could include black people. In the 70s, people did not sag their pants. Okay, this sort of thing really only took hold during the gangster rap era, and then it just seemed to get worse the longer people kept doing it. But Marc Lamont Hill, not only does he feel that it's his job as a professor at Temple. I don't even know let's look up what so Marc Lamont Hill, Temple. So what department is he in? Let's look it up. So he's at the Klein College of Media, and he's the Department of Media Studies and Production, Media and Communication. Okay, so I don't see what that has to do with any of the stuff that he talks about. In fact, you could probably make the case that Marc Lamont Hill thinks that by virtue of the fact that he's the professor of anything, he can just tell the rest of the world what to think about a given topic. And the fact is, if you look, this takes only a couple seconds to do. You go to the Yale University website. They have the Palestinian National Charter. So the Palestinian National Charter actually goes and says in Article 6, the Jews who had normally resided in Palestine until the beginning of the Zionist invasion will be considered Palestinians. Now you might say, well, this means that all the Jews who arrived before 1948. No, that would have to be the Zionist invasion. If you really think about it, began in the 19th century, in the 1880s and the 1890s. So this means that hardly any of the Jews, whether they are of the North African and Arab world persuasion, the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, or the Ashkenaz, the European-born Jews, the vast majority of them, and I'm saying upwards of 90%, would not be entitled to citizenship of a future Palestinian state, and therefore his definition is not even holding true by the Palestinian definition. They don't consider it that way. So he's basically talking completely out of his ass, as he usually does. And I'll tell you another thing. If you consider who those people were, the Jews who preceded the Zionist movement, or who were, they were descended from people who lived there prior to the founding of the State of Israel, those were not people that were opponents of Zionism. In fact, on the contrary, they welcomed the upsurge of Jewish community in the Holy Land. Why would you ever want less people who are like you in the area that you live in, unless you lived in a very dysfunctional society? It just doesn't make any sense. So you can see that there's people like the first rabbi of the state of Israel, the Sephardic chief rabbi, Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Chai Uziel, was a pretty hardcore Zionist. Okay, you can see this. This is an article about it over here. And these are the, and people can dispute this, but there are no other sources for people like that. If anything, the more you research these people, the harder it becomes to propose that there is a such thing as a real Palestinian Jewish identity that's contrary to Zionism. Okay, and I'm speaking that I say in this article, my parents were from Israel, but my mom specifically was Iraqi, and it would be hard to classify her as a political Zionist. In fact, you could probably make the case that she was, trying to escape from she was not political at all. She was essentially saying, well, I don't want to raise my kids in a violent area of the world where they could just get killed or whatever. So she moved here. I ended up moving there for a while. I did do my military service there. And then I came back here. And people have different attitudes, but that doesn't mean because you have a different attitude than the political Zionist movements, whether it's the Likud or whether it's the older labor Zionist movement or whether it's other iterations of the Zionist movement. It does not mean that you believe that that the Mizrahi Jews are are Palestinians of any shape or form. In fact, so if you look at the majority of the Oriental Jews, the Mizrahis, because Mizrah means Eastern or Oriental or Orient in Hebrew, the majority of them happen to be much more hardline on issues of the negotiations with the Palestinians or keeping control of parts of the land of Israel. So they don't want to give away land. They're more bullish on having people settle in the West Bank, or as is called in Hebrew, Judea and Samaria. Yudah v'Shomron, that's what they call it. So you can even find here. This is Gula Cohn. I'm not going to play this clip, but it's in the article. I'll put the article in the comments. She goes through this whole issue where she actually broke away from the Likud. Nowadays, you look at some of these anti-Zionist activists or pro-Palestine activists. They look at the Likud as the embodiment of the oppressive Zionist movement. Well, Gula Cohn actually left the Likud because it wasn't hardline enough. She didn't want them to give back the Sinai Peninsula to the Egyptians back in 1979. She was Yemenite and Moroccan, mixed heritage, Yemenite and Moroccan. So she was a Mizrahi Jew, whereas Netanyahu, who only came along later, he's an Ashkenaz, so she's further to the right than him. And the same can be said of a lot of these other people who have been politicians or leaders who come from a Mizrahi heritage. For example, you have David Levy, who was a minister in several governments under, for example, I think he was the foreign minister under Netanyahu. So these people who come into politics and they happen to be from Mizrahi backgrounds, they tend not to be pro negotiation at all. Now there are exceptions, and I go through some of them. There's, for example, these people like Amir Peretz, who he was the defense minister when I lived there and when I was in the army. There was Ron Cohen, who's retired now. He was a pretty pro-peace activist. There was what was called the Israeli Black Panther Party. And yes, they were inspired by the American example. But none of them, even the most extreme ones, ever claimed a Palestinian identity because they knew better. It was, in fact, most of them didn't come from the historic. They came from Morocco. They came from places like that. They knew better. It's really a testament to his idiocy that Marc Lamont Hill said something like this. And that's why I include any article from now on that I write about a subject that in any way concerns Marc Lamont Hill will include this clip of him arguing with Patrice O'Neill.
It's our top story tonight. The whole country is buzzing.
So we'll see. Here's a part that I like.
It was wrong. He's apologized. At what point do we say, okay, how about a little forgiveness? He's, been contrite. He went on Reverend Sharpton's show today. He realizes he did wrong. Do we keep punishing the guy?
He's crying.
Well, first let me say I didn't find him contrite on Reverend Sharpton's show. I found him arrogant. I found him somewhat belligerent.
What do you want? You want blood?
And his "you people" comment to me really underscored the fact that he's not all that apologetic, and that deep beneath him is a severe character flaw that's directly connected to racism.
We all have character flaws.
Doctor, do you think...
Absolutely. And if your character flaws were uttered in such a way that they cause severe abuse to people in full public view on a daily basis, which some may argue,
do you know that anybody was really abused
should be fired?
Was anybody really?
So there you have it. This idiot, this piece of crap, Marc Lamont Hill, he had enough warning back in 2007 with Patrice O'Neill, who, God rest his soul, one of the great comedians, not exactly germane to the topic here, but freedom of speech has to be something that you agree that it's, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So when you try to limit freedom of speech, when you try to tell other people what to say or what not to say, and then you say something that's ridiculous and absurd on its face like this, you have to live with the consequences. And that's why people are going after Marc Lamont Hill now, because of the way he behaves towards other people when it comes to topics that are politically charged and have some sort of, for lack of a better term, a lot of people have skin in the game. That's really the problem with him. He wants to be in the mix and tell other people what to say. And then when other people, they use the same sort of limiting tactics on him, he behaves as if he's some sort of free speech martyr. He's not a free speech martyr. If you ever hear from left-wing people talking about how their freedom of speech is being limited, you'll notice they often use the term academic freedom. And the reason they use academic freedom is because they don't really believe in freedom of speech. Progressives don't believe in freedom of speech. They believe in correct speech that must be broadcast and proclaimed to the entire world. And every other type of speech in their minds is some sort of violent imposition on victimized communities. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also, please subscribe to me on BitChute. You can find me over here. It's Chef Leopard. You can see most of my videos are already up there. You can find me on Minds, also Chef Leopard. And you can find me on Gab at Starscream85 or on Subscribestar if you want to, contribute a little. You have some money to waste on crappy YouTube videos. Also Chef Leopard. And I'll talk to you guys later. Hope you enjoyed your Memorial Day and have a great rest of your week.